The blizzard didn't just erase the roads outside Burlington. It threatened to swallow the fragile lives of 2 German shepherd puppies held against a woman's chest as she stumbled toward the only flickering light in the woods. When the door finally opened, she didn't find a casual neighbor, but a cold-eyed FBI agent and a retired K-9 partner who were already hunting the monsters she was running from. Before we uncover the truth behind these freezing puppies, please subscribe to the channel and follow this story to its shocking conclusion. Comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this miracle reaches. 3 knocks, Megan. That's not the wind, and that's certainly not a branch hitting the siding. Special Agent Megan Carter whispered to herself. She heard her hand hovering inches from her sidearm as the cabin groaned under the weight of the Vermont storm. Ace, her Belgian Malinois German shepherd partner, was already a statue of coiled muscle by the door, his low, vibrating growl barely audible over the screaming gale. Easy, boy. If someone's out there in this, they're either desperate or they're the reason I'm hiding out here in the first place. She wrenched the door open, and the blizzard exploded into the warm room, a white fury that nearly knocked her off her feet. A woman, Clara, stumbled through the threshold, her face a mask of blue-tinged skin and ice-clumped hair, her body bent double as if she were trying to protect her own heart from stopping. Please. They're so cold. They stopped moving miles ago, Clara gasped, her voice a shredded ribbon of sound before her knees finally gave way. Megan caught her just before she hit the floor, and that's when she saw the bundle. 2 German shepherd puppies, no more than 5 weeks old, their soaked fur glittering with frost, and their breathing so shallow it was almost invisible. Ace, get back! I need space! Megan barked, her FBI training overriding the shock as she dragged the woman toward the hearth. Clara, stay with me. Look at my eyes. I need you to tell me where you found them. Under the overpass, a cardboard box. They were just dumped like trash, Clara whispered, her head lolling back as the warmth of the cabin began to thaw the terror in her veins. Megan didn't waste a second. She stripped the frozen blankets away and wrapped the pups in dry wool, her hands moving with the surgical precision of someone who had seen too many crime scenes to be rattled by blood or ice. Ace moved in then, not to investigate, but to act. He laid his massive, warm body around the shivering pups, becoming a living furnace of fur and muscle. You're a good boy, Ace. Keep them warm, Megan muttered, her eyes narrowing as she noticed a thin leather collar on the smaller pup. She pulled the tag into the firelight and felt a coldness sharper than the blizzard settle in her gut. Riverbend Kennels, she read aloud, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Clara, did you see a truck? Anything with a logo? Riverbend was supposed to be shuttered 3 years ago after the federal raid. Just tire tracks, fresh ones. Someone was there minutes before I reached them, Clara said, her voice growing stronger even as she trembled. The major twist hit when Megan's phone buzzed with a priority alert from Deputy Sullivan. Megan, we just found another crate near Mile Creek. Same breed, same age, but these ones didn't have a Clara to find them in time. It's not just a dumping, Mark. It's a liquidation, Megan hissed into the phone, her gray eyes turning to flint. They're clearing out the evidence because they know I'm close. They'd rather let them freeze than let me find the warehouse. She looked at Ace, who was gently licking the ice from the pup's paws, and then at Clara, who was watching her with a mixture of fear and newfound resolve. I didn't come here to hide from my cases, Clara. I came here because Riverbend is the one ghost I couldn't lay to rest. The tension spiked when Ace suddenly stood up. She knew his ears pricked toward the window, a low rumble starting deep in his chest that wasn't for the puppies. "Megan, someone's out there," Clara whispered, her face draining of color as she caught the glint of a flashlight beam cutting through the trees. "Get in the back room now," Megan commanded, her hand closing around the grip of her service weapon as the floorboards groaned under a weight that wasn't the wind. They didn't just dump the dogs. They followed the trail of the person who tried to save them. The section reached a fever pitch as Megan doused the lanterns, plunging the cabin into a suffocating darkness lit only by the dying embers of the stove. She could hear the crunch of boots on the porch, deliberate, heavy, and lethal. "I know you're in there, Agent Carter. Give us the property. And maybe we forget we saw your truck," a rough, gravelly voice shouted through the wood. "Property?" Megan whispered, her eyes meeting Ace's in the dark. "He's calling these lives property." The final cliffhanger of the part occurred as the cabin door handle began to turn, slowly and mockingly, while the puppies let out a tiny, high-pitched whimper that signaled their location to the monsters outside. Megan didn't wait. She signaled Ace, and the retired K9 lunged at the door just as it kicked inward, a blur of tan and black teeth meeting the cold steel of a world that had forgotten what it meant to be human. The cabin door didn't just open. It shattered under the kick of a man who measured life in profit and didn't care about the blood on his hands. Ace lunged into the blinding white chaos of the doorway, his body a blur of black and tan muscle that met the intruder with a guttural roar of pure protective instinct. Megan didn't hesitate. She tackled Clara to the floor, shielding her from the freezing wind that exploded inward, carrying the scent of gasoline and old, hidden cruelty. "Get back, Clara! Don't look at them!" Megan screamed, her hand finding the grip of her service weapon as the floorboards groaned under the weight of more than one set of boots. The first mini-climax hit when the lead man swung a heavy flashlight, narrowly missing Ace's head, only for the retired K9 to force him back into the crusted snow with a precision that years of retirement hadn't dulled. Megan closed the distance in seconds, twisting the man's arm behind his back until the handcuffs snapped shut with a sound like a bone breaking. "Riverbend is dead, Agent Carter. You're digging up a grave that's already empty." The man spat, his face pressed into the freezing porch wood, while his accomplice vanished into the swirling white wall of the forest. Megan didn't answer. Her heart was hammering against her ribs as she looked at the two puppies shivering by the hearth, their tiny lives still hanging by a thread. A major twist struck when Ace didn't return to the fire. Instead, he stood at the edge of the porch, barking a signal toward the dark tree line that wasn't a warning, but a call for help. Megan realized then that the tracks Clara had followed weren't just from a truck. They were a trail of disposal that led straight to the frozen lake. "Clara, stay with the pups! Keep them warm!" Megan commanded, grabbing her gear and following Ace into the throat of the storm, where the air was sharp enough to steal the very breath from her lungs. They found him near the lake's edge, a medium-sized Siberian husky pinned in a narrow, icy rut, his blue eyes flicking with a wary, glassy confusion as the cold began to take hold. "Hypothermia. He's been here a while," Megan muttered, her hands shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and fury as she looped a rope around a nearby birch to create leverage. With one final, agonizing heave, the husky slid free, collapsing against Ace's warm flank as if he had finally found a place where he didn't have to be vigilant anymore. The tension peaked when Megan wiped the frost from the husky's collar, and saw the same etched letters that had haunted her career. Riverbend training. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a map leading to the heart of a system that treated living souls as disposable inventory. The biting mountain air didn't just sting Megan's face. It carried the metallic scent of old, hidden crimes as she hauled the shivering Siberian husky toward the cabin's flickering porch light. Ace led the way, his paws barely whispering against the crusted snow, while Clara stood in the doorway with the two puppies clutched to her chest in a desperate, living shield. He's alive, Clara, but he's not just a stray. He's a witness to a system that thinks these lives are disposable. Megan rasped, her voice cracking as the weight of the night began to settle into her bones. The first mini-climax erupted when Megan laid the husky near the hearth and saw the same Riverbend training tag reflecting the orange embers of the stove. They aren't just dumping puppies, Clara. They're liquidating an entire operation because they know my team is closing the net. Megan hissed, her hands shaking with a lethal, quiet fury as she checked her tactical vest. The major twist hit when Deputy Sullivan's voice crackled through the radio. Not with a check-in, but with a warning that sent the blood rushing from Megan's face. Carter, we just pulled a white cargo truck over near Mile Creek, but the driver's seat was empty. They're moving on foot, and they've got a dozen more crates hidden in the old warehouse. The radio spat, the static sounding like a death rattle in the small room. I'm coming with you, Megan. I've been running my whole life, but tonight I don't, Clara declared, her voice unyielding despite her narrow, trembling shoulders. Megan studied her for a split second, weighing the risk against the fire in the girl's eyes, then nodded once as she clipped her FBI badge inside her jacket. The tension spiked when Ace suddenly lunged at the discarded cardboard box, his nose frozen against a damp edge as a low, thoughtful rumble vibrated through his chest. Megan knelt beside him, catching the unmistakable scent of gasoline and bleach meant to erase a trail. They aren't hiding from me, Ace. They're trying to burn the evidence while it's still breathing, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. The final cliffhanger of the section occurred as they stepped into the night, the wind rising to a howl, only to see the faint, orange glow of a fire starting in the direction of the old Riverbend warehouse. Megan didn't wait for backup. She signaled Ace and surged into the throat of the blizzard, knowing that every second they lost was another life turning to ash in the snow. The orange glow on the horizon wasn't a sunset. It was the funeral pyre of an illegal empire, and Megan Carter felt the heat of it through her tactical vest as she pushed the SUV through snowdrifts that climbed like walls. Ace stood rigid in the back, his amber eyes reflecting the distant flames with a quiet, working intelligence that didn't need a command to understand the stakes. Clara gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white, her breath fogging the glass as they neared the Mill Creek warehouse. They're burning the evidence while it's still breathing, aren't they? Clara whispered, her voice a jagged shard of sound that cut through the roar of the heater. The first mini-climax hit when Megan slammed the brakes, the vehicle skidding to a halt just yards from a chain-link fence bowing under the weight of years of neglect. She didn't wait for the engine to die before she was out, her flashlight off, her body cam blinking a steady, lethal red. Ace lunged through a gap in the wire, his paws silent on the crusted snow, leading them toward the sagging overhang where the cages were lined up like headstones. "Federal agent, step away from the cages!" Megan's voice was a whip crack in the dark, her hand already closing around the grip of her service weapon, as a thick-set man in a leather coat stepped into the light. He didn't look like a caretaker. He looked like a man who measured life in profit and loss. "You don't have a warrant, Agent," he barked, his eyes small and sharp with practiced cruelty. A major twist erupted when the man didn't reach for a weapon, but for a remote detonator. The realization hitting Megan like a physical blow. He wasn't trying to hide the dogs. He was the distraction for a secondary fire already licking at the main building. "Ace! Take him!" Megan roared, and the retired K9 lunged, not to bite but to block, his body a blur of tan and black muscle that forced the man back into the drifts. The tension peaked as Clara ignored Megan's order to stay back, her thin hands fumbling with the cheap locks on the temporary kennels as the German shepherds inside whimpered in desperate hope. "It's okay. I've got you," Clara sobbed, her fingers bleeding as she snapped the first cage open, a dog limping forward with a tail that wagged once, cautiously. Another mini-climax flared when Megan closed the distance, her training taking over as she twisted the man's arm and drove him into the snow, the handcuffs snapping shut with a finality that signaled the end of Riverbend. But as sirens began to wail in the distance, Ace didn't return to her side. He stood at the warehouse door, his ears pricked toward a sound that made Megan's blood run cold. A muffled, rhythmic scratching from behind the steel doors. The warehouse wasn't just a site for disposal. It was a nursery, and the fire was moving toward the inner walls. The steel doors of the warehouse groaned as the heat from within began to warp the very frame that held them shut. But Special Agent Megan Carter didn't wait for the hinges to fail. She slammed her shoulder against the metal, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she heard that desperate, rhythmic scratching from the other side. "Clara, get the others to the truck. Ace, with me!" Megan roared, her voice a whip crack of authority that cut through the roar of the encroaching flames. Ace didn't hesitate. The retired K9 lunged into the smoke-filled gap she created, his powerful body a blur of tan and black muscle as he navigated the labyrinth of shifting crates and falling embers. The first mini-climax erupted when Megan stumbled over a row of hidden cages near the back wall, her flashlight cutting through the haze to reveal eyes that didn't reflect fear, but a resigned, hollow silence. These weren't just puppies. They were the breeding stock, the weary mothers and broken fathers of the Riverbend legacy, their ribs visible beneath matted fur that smelled of bleach and despair. "I've got you. I've got you," she whispered, her hands shaking with a lethal, quiet fury as she fumbled with the rusted latches, her knuckles bleeding against the cold metal. A major twist hit when she reached the final cage and found it empty, the door hanging open as if someone had just left, or as if something had been taken. She heard a sharp, urgent bark from Ace further in the back, near the loading docks where the heat was most intense. She ran toward him, her lungs burning with the toxic mix of smoke and chemical disinfectants, only to find him pinning a second man against a stack of gasoline canisters. This wasn't a low-level henchman. He was clutching a ledger and a satellite phone, the physical proof of a network that spanned far beyond the borders of Vermont. "You're late, Carter. The buyers are already gone, and these dogs are just ash in the wind now," the man shrieked, his eyes small and sharp with practiced cruelty, even as Ace's teeth bared inches from his throat. Megan didn't argue. She drove her knee into his back and snapped the cuffs shut, the finality of the sound echoing like a death knell for the Riverbend Empire. The tension spiked again when Clara appeared at the loading dock, her face pale and drawn tight, with a resolve Megan had never seen in a civilian. She wasn't running. She was carrying the two puppies from the cabin, their black and tan fur fluffed unevenly as they whimpered at the smell of the fire. "The deputy's here, Megan. He's got the transport trucks! We have to move! Clara screamed, her voice shredded by the smoke but unyielding in its purpose. Another mini-climax flared as they began the frantic evacuation, a slow, limping procession of the broken and the brave moving through the skeletal remains of the warehouse. Megan half-carried a senior shepherd whose legs could no longer support its weight, her muscles corded and screaming as she navigated the debris. Behind her, Ace acted as a living shield, blocking the falling sparks with his own thick coat, his amber eyes never wavering from the mission. The deep, profound twist came as the last dog was loaded into Deputy Sullivan's truck, and the man with the ledger started to laugh, a harsh, jagged sound that cut through the sirens. You think this is over? I'm just one kennel. There are a dozen more like me across the coast, and they know your face now, Agent, he spat, his jaw shadowed with unshaven stubble and arrogance. Megan leaned in close, her gray eyes turning to flint, her voice a low anchor against his malice. Good, she whispered. Then they'll know exactly who's coming for them next. As the spring thaw finally began to turn the Vermont ice into slow, patient water weeks later, the silence in the woods no longer felt secretive and dangerous. Megan stood on the porch of the cabin, her FBI jacket unzipped and the lines of her life finally beginning to lower from their defensive posture. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and life, the sound of tiny squeaks and playful barks replacing the haunting wind. Evelyn Brooks, the 72-year-old whose shelter had remained closed since a winter tragedy years ago, stood in the yard with her sleeves rolled up and her silver hair twisted into a careful bun. She was directing volunteers with a calm authority that spoke of a heart finally reopening to the world. They're fighters, Megan. They just needed one door to open, Evelyn said, her long, capable hands resting on the head of Blue, the Siberian husky who had once been a glassy-eyed ghost in the snow. Milo and Sunny, the two puppies who had started it all with 3 weak knocks in a blizzard, tumbled across the grass in joyful chaos, their legs still too big for their bodies. Ace lay stretched at Megan's feet, his role shifting from operative to elder statesman as he tolerated the puppies climbing over his scarred flank with a dignity that bordered on martyrdom. The final tension peaked when Clara stepped out with a mug of coffee, her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face no longer pale with cold. She looked at the sprawling shelter, at the dogs finding their second chances, and at the woman who had opened the door when walking away would have been easier. We did it, Megan. We actually stopped them, Clara whispered, a smile tugging at her mouth that felt like the first true sign of spring. Megan Carter, special agent and survivor, looked at her chosen family, the girl, the dogs, and the K9 who had been her only light in the dark, and realized that some cases are never truly closed. They just transform into something worth protecting. The cold had taken its turn, but the miracle was that love still worked even in the deepest winter, and she was finally ready to hear the music that Sunny was always listening for. Megan didn't save those puppies by strength alone. She saved them because she finally understood that opening a door is the most powerful weapon any of us possesses.